Who do you want to be during a disaster? It's something that we should all be thinking about. I want to share some insights with you regarding preparedness. In the book, The Gardens of Democracy by Eric Liu and Nick Hanauer, they write, it is more than acknowledging that an individual basis character counts and virtue matters. It's the action, the acting as if the character of your community will sooner or later exactly reflect your own character, because it will. This is the nature of democracy. It's the nature of City 2.0. Communities, and thereby the individuals that make up those communities, are the linchpin of a preparedness 2.0, preparedness on the next level. We often hear that preparedness equals get a kit, make a plan, and be informed. But it's really so much more than that. Having the necessities on hand, food, water, phone numbers, contact information that's not in your electronic device, they're all vital. But it's really about building the network in your own neighborhood and in your own community that make it important. Author Rebecca Solnit alludes directly to this. She says, if a disaster intensifies conditions of everyday life, then the pleasures of everyday life, of everyday affection and connection become a safety net and the survival equipment. Imposing resilience from the top down is unsuccessful. San Francisco Department of Emergency Management completely recognizes that. But if we embed those capabilities authentically in people's everyday lives, we can flourish as a community. How many of you are familiar with the 2011 floods in North Dakota, the Red River flooding? Anybody? A few people? Let me tell you a little story about what happened there. In 2011, North Dakota received shattering floods, essentially. In fact, they took 21 peak records. They evacuated 28 neighborhoods and exceeded over $1.4 billion in response and recovery costs. The devastation, although related directly to that particular river basin, actually was statewide. And the Presidential Disaster Declaration provided public assistance for 44 counties and 4 tribal nations. The North Dakota Director of Emergency Management said this in the 2011 flood report. We can prepare for natural disaster, but we don't know the full impact of it. And we don't know the repercussions of it until we experience it. You see, resilience isn't really about robustness. The pyramids of Egypt are incredibly robust, but if you knock them down, they're not resilient enough to rebuild themselves. And that's the nature of how we view resilience in communities. It's not about being unaffected by an event, but rather about the ability to bounce back. And no one knows that better than Japan. March 11th, 2011, the people of Japan experienced one of the strongest earthquakes ever known. By September 12th, 2012, authorities had confirmed more than 15,000 people dead and more than 1 million buildings uninhabitable. Prime Minister Khan said, in the 65 years after the end of World War II, this was the toughest and most difficult crisis that Japan had ever faced. Here's what we know. Japan predicts a recovery of more than $300 billion. Saltwater from tsunami waves have had a lasting impact on agriculture, and international companies such as Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Nestle, GlaxoSmithKline, and others all experienced delays or shutdowns in their manufacturing capabilities. And yet Japan carried on. There were no formal requirements for austerity, but many people voluntarily conserved their resources. Temporary housing began to be established in an impacted area a mere 7 days after the disaster. And more than 930,000 people from around Japan and worldwide volunteered during the first year of recovery. That's really astonishing. But not all recovery and resilience is speedy and trouble-free. Mother Nature likes to pile trouble on. For example, After floods, come more floods. After wildfires, come more floods. After hurricanes, come more floods. And after earthquakes, come more earthquakes. Christchurch, New Zealand knows this very well. On September 4th, 2010, Christchurch experienced a 7.1 earthquake, and the quake caused extensive damage and several aftershocks, including the one on February 22nd. Now, the original quake in September killed no one. The aftershock on the 22nd of February killed 185 people. It damaged so much infrastructure, then that second aftershock, or it's actually, I think it was close to the fifth aftershock, damaged far more infrastructure than the original quake and led to liquefaction. This is what liquefaction does to your infrastructure. Someone said, whoa, and that's exactly what that's like. Your infrastructure is basically uninhabitable, can't be used. It's estimated that the recovery of the Christchurch quakes will exceed 20 billion New Zealand dollars. That will make it the third costliest earthquake worldwide. Resilience is not solely a function of the community's resources, like you saw before, infrastructure and such, but those help. And it's not defined solely by the strength of formal institutions like governments, but those help as well. Andrew Zolli and Anne-Marie Healy, the authors of this book, Resilience, found that resilient communities relied much more on informal networks, things we've been talking about today, the ability to walk out into a community and actually enjoy it, the ability to be involved or volunteer with your community. Those rooted deeply in what we consider our neighborhoods help us contend with and heal from disasters. No community in the United States knows this better than Joplin, Missouri. May 22nd, 2011, Joplin, Missouri was hit with an E5 tornado. For those of you who don't know what an E5 means, tornadoes are measured by the speed of their wind from a 0 to a 5. 5 is the most extreme. It lasted for 32 minutes. It caused damage for 13 miles, and at its widest part of the path, it stretched for over a mile in width. More than 15,000 vehicles were picked up and moved by the winds. More than 6,900 homes were completely destroyed, and almost 400 suffered major damage. The entire hospital was displaced 4 inches from its foundation. 161 people died in Joplin as a result of the storm, and nearly 1,000 people were injured. It was considered the deadliest tornado in the United States since 1947. But the recovery of Joplin is nothing short of incredible. Within hours, the state of Missouri and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, was mobilized, and they committed initial resources to the response. But it really wasn't about the government. It was about the community and the individuals and businesses that made the recovery so successful. Let me tell you a story about Jane Cage, the CEO of Heartland Technology Solutions. She has volunteered in past disaster recovery components. By the way, this is not Jane, just so you know. But this is the project she's a part of. She'd volunteered before, and so when she was approached to be a part of the Citizen Advisory Recovery team, she jumped at it. The first order of CART was to gather input like this regarding the future of Joplin. What did they want to see in their community since it had basically been razed to the ground? Thousands of suggestions were received and a recovery blueprint was created. The very interesting thing about this is as soon as they took it to all of the boards, including their city council, which would be our board of supervisors, and the school boards, they were immediately passed. The citizen involvement in Joplin has made all the difference. 88% of the people who were displaced by the storm still live within 25 miles of this city. And 95% of the students who were affected returned to classes within the school district. It's not a story, Joplin is not a story about one group of volunteers or a set of nonprofits or a single government agency. It's a story about thousands and thousands of people actually working together, people creating resilience. Senior class president Julia Lewis said, "We are stronger. We didn't wait for people to help us. We jumped right in and we got started, and it's something everyone in Joplin can be proud of." So again, I ask you, who do you want to be during a disaster. Taking the city to the next level, the 2.0 level, means getting involved in the culture, as we've heard today, and in the commissions and in the neighborhoods of the city. That involvement and that interest equals the cultivation and the sustainment of a resilient community. And that means the ability to survive a disaster. Disasters, both large and small, can devastate a community, but they can also encourage a community to continue to develop. In the epilogue of her book, A Paradise Built in Hell, Ms. Solnit concludes the following about disasters. First, they demonstrate what is possible, or perhaps more accurately, latent, the resilience and generosity of those around us and their ability to improvise another kind of society. And second, they demonstrate how deeply most of us desire connection, participation, altruism, and purposefulness. Resilient behavior is within each of us and within each of our communities. I was asked for a sentence of advice when I first started the TEDx process, something that would help cultivate our resilience. My advice was say hello to your neighbors. Participating in the community, whether at a museum, a community improvement cause, or on a neighborhood emergency response team, dramatically increases individual resilience and the resilience of your community to recover for any disaster that it might encounter. So again, I ask you, who do you want to be during a disaster? Thanks.